All right, hello everybody. This is Colin Jenkins. This is for professional development class. I'm here with one of my biggest influences, guitar-wise and production-wise. You know him as the guitarist as Converge, and you know him as one of the most famous punk and metal producers in the world. I'm with him today, Mr. Kurt Ballou. Kurt, thanks for doing this.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
All right, so for this interview, I just wanted to ask if you could state to the fans what have you been working on recently,
Um,
or what bands have you been working with recently?
let's see. Right now I'm mixing Zeal and Adder. Prior to that, I was doing some drum tracking with High on Fire. They're doing the remainder of the tracking out in Portland um, with Brian Sowers, who's probably better known as an amp builder, but he also is a great recording engineer.
Nice.
And let's see, next thing I have coming up is Joyce Manor. Um, what else have I done lately? Fuming Mouth. Um, I mixed some new Modern Life is War songs. And I have to look at my calendar. I'm spacing out. But I'm busy making records. I was on tour recently as well.
Sorry?
I was on tour recently as well.
Yeah, I was going to say, you've also been keeping busy because Converge just finished the West Coast tour, I believe.
Yes.
Nice. So you've been keeping yourself pretty busy.
I have, yeah. Yeah, never a dull moment. Well, never a moment unfilled with something to do.
Yeah, it's definitely safe to say you've been keeping yourself pretty busy at Godcity, and you've been working at your home studio Godcity since I'd say 20 years. How did Godcity start? Because I do remember reading a little bit and saying it all started with a severance package of sorts.
No, that's not entirely true. I mean, journalists love to take like little pieces of things and then like run with it, rather than fact checking and stuff. So no, my studio existed for years before that, but I was working as a biomedical engineer in the 90s and into the early 2000s, and took a voluntary layoff and got some severance, and that was able to help float me for a little while I was searching for a new space. So the current iteration of Godcity came after I was laid off my previous job. But this is my fourth studio.
Really? So Godcity has moved around for quite a while before it.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was typical of like people in their 20s, like you live somewhere new every year or two, for whatever reason, school or friends or
absolutely
relocating or whatever. So so as I had to move around and was in rental property and stuff like that, my studio moved as well, and and I got to the point where I felt like it might be something that I'd be able to do professionally, but the rental space that I was in at the time was kind of holding me back from being able to like really go for it. So I felt like it was necessary to find a building that was either a long-term lease or something that I could buy before putting the time and effort into building a studio where I could work full-time.
Yeah, because I remember reading, I think, on Wikipedia, like one of my favorite like 90s metal albums that you produced, Cave In Until Your Heart Stops. I remember reading, and it said that Godcity at that time was in Allston.
Yeah, I was in the basement of a house that I was living in, shared with like the guys from Piebald and a few other people.
Nice.
And when I moved into that house, I had just a half-inch 8-track and a small Fostex console. And by the time I moved out of that house, I had a Soundcraft Ghost and a Fostex G24S 1-inch tape machine, and that's the stuff that was used for that Cave-In record. And nice. Steve was living around the corner from me in Allston at the time, so it was super easy for him to just stop by and do a little bit of recording here and there, and we kind of picked at that record for a while before it was done.
When did Godcity officially move to Salem?
The studio opened in Salem in 2003.
All right, nice. And you've been recording there ever since.
Yes.
I'm actually curious as well. Why did you decide? Because usually when I hear about like producer stories, like everyone decides to go like, to New York or to Los Angeles or Nashville to like sort of like make the big time of sorts. Why did you decide to like stay local and stay here in New England?
I mean, this is where I'm from. I have a connection to this place, and the band that I'm in is from here, and I didn't really feel a compelling reason to move. And I didn't really have that kind of career aspiration either. I mean, at the time, when I came up playing this aggressive music stuff, there weren't bands that earned a living at it. I mean, maybe like there was like one or two New York hardcore bands, or like a couple of like sort of crossover metal bands that might sort of earn a living, but like I had no expectation of recording the kind of bands that I record being like an actual career. So it wasn't something that I like treated as like a career venture. And it's just something I did because I loved it and it was fun for me. And things just kind of snowballed with it, and it got to the point where like I could record music full time, and it was because not only just my ability in my studio was growing, but just the whole music scene that I was involved in was growing, and so the climate that I was existing in had changed. It gave me the opportunity to do music full time. But by the time I got to that point, I was already pretty well established as being based in this area, and I didn't really feel a compelling reason to move. There were certainly plenty of great engineers in New York, LA, and Nashville, and all that, and Boston's maybe like a little bit less saturated of a market, especially when it came to like doing aggressive music.
Absolutely.
I want to say maybe the only other person I can think of that was kind of doing the same things as me were like Andrew Schneider, Dean Baltalonis, Brian McTurnan, and those people all moved. They went seeking. They weren't. Well, Brian was a studio owner, but he was based in D.C., so he moved down there. And like Dean and Andrew were not studio owners at the time, and they went to New York looking for opportunity because they were just freelancing. So it made more sense for them to go to where like the talent was. They didn't have like a physical space tying them to here. And having like your own physical studio is like, it has its ups and downs, of course. Like you always have a place to work, but you also always have a mortgage or rent to pay or whatever. So they had a different business model. They left, and which kind of left me a bit on my own. So I became, for at least for a time, for the local scene, like the guy to go to for punk and hardcore kind of stuff. There's other people that have come along since me, and that business has changed. But yeah, I guess I never really felt a compelling reason to move. I figured that if I were to go to another town seeking like bigger jobs, that those are probably jobs that I would enjoy less, and they would be bands that I don't really care for.
Yeah.
I think like the kind of music that I like, I don't really think that there's like a lot of bands that are like would be a more lucrative job to like record up a similar kind of band that's like bigger or something, because they're like in the stuff that I like, I record stuff that's kind of the most established bands in their genres.
Yeah, well,
or their little micro subgenres, I should say.
Yeah, I mean, and this also, I guess, at the tail end of another question, because I always try my best just to go just to local shows, even like DIY shows, house shows, just everything. For you, how important is keeping the local scene or the local DIY scene? How important, just keeping that alive and kicking? How important is that to you?
I mean, it's from an engineer's perspective. Yeah, I think it's crucial that you have good bands and exciting bands to record. So obviously,
Absolutely.
like a music scene is super important, because without creative music happening, there's nothing to record. And also without people who record that music involved in those scenes, then the people making the music don't necessarily have someone that they feel like they can trust who is a part of their community. I mean, that was always like my strength starting out, was that I was someone who went to a lot of shows, who played in bands, and was part of the community in which I was recording most of the bands. Obviously, like life moves on, and things, as you get older, things get a little more complicated sometimes, and you can't go to as many shows. So I mean, I'm not at the shows all the time anymore, but it was having been through that culture and been a part of it for a very long time. I think it gives me a certain strength in that the bands that I record, know that I can understand where they're coming from and what their lifestyle is, and the ups and downs of touring and all that kind of stuff. That is kind of one downside to Boston, actually, in that it's such a big college town that people don't tend to stay here. A lot of people come here for their early 20s and then move on. So it makes it a bit difficult to age here, just because the people, especially like in the DIY, like punk and hardcore scenes, a lot of the people involved in doing that stuff, are turning over every 4 years or so. So I haven't stayed as connected to that, as I used to be, for that reason.
Well, seeing is like, it's almost like you said, like every 4 years, like there's always like another band that's another new band, and then that band sort of is either they've moved on or the band's gone. But the another question I've had, is there a band that you've always wanted to work with, but just because there's scheduling conflicts, or the band is not as broken up, or they're retired, is there a band that you've always wanted to work with at Godcity?
I don't know. I mean, people ask me that question all the time. I pretty much don't like to answer any kind of like, what's your favorite this, what's the best that, what's the thing you've always wanted to do, or all that, because that stuff's like not really relevant. I mean, I don't ever approach bands. Bands approach me. So if a band approaches me and they want to record, then then I check them out, or if I'm not familiar with them, and see if it's something that I feel like I'm excited to do and could make a valuable contribution to. There's a lot of bands out there that I'm friends with that I've never recorded, that I'd like to record, but I also don't want to leverage my friendship in in trying to talk them into recording with me. I've always been kind of turned off to just business in music in general. I don't like talking about money. I don't like I don't like feeling like a sleazy business person. I just want to just happy to have some cool opportunities sometimes to record music that I'm excited about, and I'm happy with that. I'm not envious of the things that I don't get to do.
Nice. Well, it's funny enough that you mentioned you try not to be so much of a business person, but in the last couple of months, and even the last couple of years, I've noticed it's much more focusing on how I'm just gonna say how not great the music business, I think, as a whole is, really, because with you, I've seen you've been doing the shit since the beginning of the 90s with Converge, and as I said, from the late 90s and 2000s now to being a famous punk and metal producer, engineer. How much have you seen the music industry, particularly in the punk and metal music industry, change? Is there one aspect, or at least one aspect of that punk metal industry that you've seen change, perhaps even drastically?
Well, it never used to be called an industry. Well, no, but for real though, I mean, I don't know, punk was always just a bunch of fucked up kids that didn't know what else to do other than to make loud music and cause trouble. And pretty much everybody that I know, especially from when I first started getting into this stuff, was some sort of freak in some way or another. And obviously having, I'm from kind of like the last generation who grew up without the internet, so our discovery of music was a lot different than the discovery of music is now, and we are certainly like reaping the benefits of that, and I think that's one main reason why, punk, hardcore, metal, all that stuff is so much bigger and also more diverse now than it ever was when I was a kid. Just people have access to all this information, and it changes the way they listen to music, changes the way they get excited about music, and it's just for better or for worse, it's been very changing to the entire community, and because of that now there is it is possible for a band that is compelling to an audience and that works hard to sustain themselves playing music for at least while they're actively doing it. I don't think there's any hardcore bands. I don't care how big they are. I don't think there's really any of those that have like pensions or like real retirement funds or anything like that. But as long as those bands are willing to like tour all the time and stuff, they're able to support themselves while they're doing it. And that is certainly entirely different because all the bands that I looked up to. I mean, some of them, like the metal bands I looked up to, they were doing that full time. But metal's always been really different than punk and hardcore and from a business perspective. Some of those bands were earning a living, but like punk and hardcore bands, there was no even you wouldn't even like consider the idea. Like it's not something that just wasn't possible. When we toured, we just all took turns filling the gas tank and did it because we loved it, and not because like it was a job.
Yeah.
And I'm not trying to say that like anybody playing this kind of music now does it because they're trying to get rich or anything like that. But there is definitely like a change that's happened, and now like if people have like a bit of like a entrepreneurial spirit, or if people just like don't want to work a shit job, they think it might be possible to to do their band full time, and for a certain amount of time it might be. So certainly different in that respect than it was when I started.
I think but it's funny enough that you mentioned like the rise of the internet. What I've noticed is sometimes like, and this might translate less for punk and much more just for like rock and metal. It becomes like a little too serious because I don't see maybe apart from from Dillinger Escape Plan or even the guys you've worked with, Mutoid Man, there's not really that, unless like it's in like an underground sort of setting. It's like there's not really a lot of like rock metal artists that don't really have sort of like a goofy aspect to it. To the industry.
Yes, you mean zany bands?
Yeah, almost.
No, I think there's always been zany bands. Well, Every Time He Dies are obviously like a great current example. But a lot of the crossover thrash stuff, like your DRIs and even like Suicidal Tendencies to a certain extent, and like the Meat Men and the Crucial Youth. I think there's been an element of humor. Murphy's Law, of course. There's been an element of humor kind of all along, and like an element of theatricality all along. I might not have been like the prevailing winds, but it's always been there.
Yeah. Also, there was another. Okay, actually, the first question I do want to ask: did you have any goals at the start of your music career, whether it was like the start of Converge or even the start of doing your producing and engineering? Did you have any like first goals?
I do remember when I first started playing guitar, like my biggest goal in playing guitar was to play in an Iron Maiden cover band at my high school's Battle of the Bands. When Converge started, I was just I had recently been kicked out of a band, and I think maybe I had something to prove. That band was still kind of that band. I wasn't kicked out, but the band basically, it was a 5-piece band, and then we broke up, and then like the other 4 of them started in a new band like a month later. So it sort of felt like I was like kicked out in a roundabout way, and that band was like doing pretty well for a little while, and so I think I maybe had like a little something to prove. And I was like a lot of punks. I was like a kid who was bullied a lot in high school, and you know, wasn't popular, wasn't cool, and nothing like that. So like being like a pretty decent guitar player for amongst like the people in my genre, and being able to like write songs that were like a little faster, a little harder, a little heavier, and like be like just like a decent band. I got a lot of pride from that, and it gave me some self-esteem that I think I was like, and some confidence that I think I was really lacking at the time. So I think, I don't know if that was a goal for why I did it, but as I started to do it, I started to get that feeling, and I think that's one of the things that pushed me harder. Not to mention, like, I've always been like a problem solver, like a puzzle solver, and songs or songwriting can be looked at as puzzle solving.
Yeah,
and I think I really enjoyed that aspect of songwriting, and just being able to like create something out of nothing and have something to show for it has been something, from as soon as I could build Legos, was something that has always been the primary drive in my life, and recording was just an extension of that. I think the main reason I started recording was not to have a job in recording, but was that I was always really dissatisfied with how the recordings of Converge were turning out when we went to other studios, and
you wanted to have
but I
complete
didn't really
control.
know what.
You wanted to have like complete control over that.
Initially, no. Initially, I wanted to. I did, from an early age, recognize that like the more musical experience that you can have, the bigger your musical vocabulary is, and the better your ability to communicate your ideas is. So,
Absolutely.
And that means a whole bunch of things. That means like learning about production, engineering. That means like learning as many instruments as you can. That means learning as many styles as you can. I did all the school band stuff, and so I had like some of that background, and I can play drums, and I can sing a little, and I can play some horns, and I can play bass or whatever. I can just kind of like pick up an instrument and sort of figure it out. And the more of that I found myself doing, the better the better band member I became, and recording to me was like an extension of that. So I figured that if I started recording, that I'd be able to like record my ideas better, and try out guitar harmonies and stuff like that. But also, if I understood the recording process and what went into it, and how to capture sounds, or how to make things sound the way that I wanted, I'd be able to communicate better with the engineers that we were working with when Converge went into record. And it got to a certain point where I felt like I had enough equipment and enough chops that I could start trying to record Converge. Like, I think I did like an EP first, and then still would go to other people to record albums, and then slowly but surely I took over the reins of all the Converge production. But from when I started recording in like 1995, I think it wasn't until 2003 or 4. It was 2000. I think it might have been 2004 before I did. No, I think it was 2006 before I did a Converge record entirely on my own.
Was this? Oh, this was No Heroes.
Yeah, No Heroes. So No Heroes was the first one that I recorded and mixed. And prior to that, there was always another engineer involved, and mastering is always somebody else. But recording and mixing had other engineers involved, and at least portions of the process before that.
So I asked if you had the goals at the start of your music career. Do you have any goals for the future?
Yeah, I have a family now, which means that I can't work 80 hours a week anymore. So my immediate goal is, and I have a plan in place, which I'm not really prepared to talk about, but my immediate goal is to make my studio more of a something that's working more continuously even when I'm not here. So whether that means that there's other engineers that are doing their own work in my space, or whether that means that like the bands that I record, or it's not just me recording them. It's a production team recording them. So my hope is to be physically in my studio less, but still working a lot, but focusing more on broad brush things. Like whether it's designing pedals or whether it's I have a mix room at my house, so I can be mixing records at home while someone else is tracking stuff in my studio, and that sort of plan and workflow is still taking shape. But I hope over the next year or so to kind of change the way the schedule works with bands in my studio and with my presence here.
Nice. Actually, I suppose I perhaps would ask this perhaps earlier. What were your influences for producing and engineering? Did you have any like people? It's just like this guy. I love the way this guy records.
I don't really think I had that from specific albums. I think most of my influence came from the engineers that I had worked with in the studio.
Okay.
So the probably the main people that I had worked with on various recordings was Jim Siegel, who used to own a studio called The Outpost that was in Stoughton. I don't believe it's there anymore.
Yeah.
And Brian McTurnan, who had his studio was called Salad Days, and he had a million locations, and I worked in a bunch of them with him. And he was the one who really propped me up and said, like, hey, you have a good ear for this, and you have a kind of like the right personality to pursue this, and like if you want to record, I think you'd be good at it, and you should try. I also think that I was super annoying to work with because I'm a bit of a control freak, like a lot of recording engineers are. So he probably thought that if he encouraged me to record, then he wouldn't have to deal with me. So, but for whatever reason, like that helped. I sort of felt like he was the other guy working in the punk scene that I was friends with. So I sort of felt like I needed his permission or his blessing to start recording, and so he gave me that, and that was really useful. There's also Andrew Schneider, who was at one point the chief engineer at New Alliance, and I did some stuff with him. I also did some other stuff on my own at New Alliance, so he and I became friends, and he super talented guy. He'd been recording for only a year or two longer than me, and he was able to kind of help guide me a bit. And I think certainly in terms of like a producer, he was really helpful for me. And then finally, Matt Ellard, who you probably know, who works at Berklee, and he was the primary engineer on Converge's Jane Doe. So I learned a ton from him, not only about engineering but producing and just general workflow and approach. And
because I remember.
So he's great too.
I remember seeing a quote that Ellard was saying that you that you watched him like a quote unquote hawk during the Jane Doe sessions, and you were really super focused.
I'm not sure. Yeah, I mean, I definitely was. I'm not sure if I watched him to learn or if I watched him to like make sure that he was working hard, like just for quality control. Yeah, I know that I'm definitely not the same person today that I was then. I think. I mean, I may not be the most socially graceful person now, but I definitely wasn't then. So I'm sure I made it hard for him.
What about?
He did a great job.
What about guitar? What about? Did you have any influences then when you picked up guitar?
Yeah, I mean, I pretty much learned how to play guitar playing a lot of Suicidal Tendencies records.
Nice.
So Rocky George would be probably more than anybody else who played guitar in that band would be a big influence on me. I mean, and I loved all the classic rock stuff. Like prior to playing guitar, I had a Columbia House tapes subscription, and I would get all like the classic rock stuff, the Creams and the Jimi Hendrixes and the Zeppelins and Deep Purples and that kind of stuff. So and Van Halen. So sort of like flashy lead guitar has always been fun for me, even though I'm not really a lead guitar player and haven't really explored that side of things too much. But people that were like real expressive was influential to me. And the other thing that like the other records that I learned to play guitar along with were probably like the first four Metallica records and like probably the first 4 or 5 Slayer records.
Nice.
So and James, say what you want about Metallica, like James Hetfield is probably the most badass thrash metal rhythm guitar player out there.
Absolutely.
And it's like the precision of his picking, like really carried that band rhythmically. And I actually didn't even notice Lars's shortcomings until later in life, just because like the Hetfield's right hand was just so tight that it almost like the drums almost didn't matter.
Yeah. So I have a couple more questions left.
I can't talk too much longer.
Yeah. Of course, I'll try and keep it short.
Okay.
But funny enough, you mentioned you've got a family now, and it's funny that now I'm thinking of the new one of my favorite bands, Tool, and the new album. And I'm always thinking that Adam Jones, he's got a family, he's got a wife and 2 kids, and he spends a lot of time with them. So I'm always wondering, spending a lot of time with family, perhaps can get in the way of the music life and a new album and stuff like, or a tour or stuff like that. Does that translate for you sometimes? Does like the music producer and engineer life and perhaps touring with Converge, does that ever get in the way of family life, or even vice versa?
Yeah, I mean, like, I've got a lot going on, so there's just like a lot of things to balance, and it's all really important to me. It makes the stuff that's like really important rise to the top, and a lot of stuff like cleaning and and paying my bills and like shit that I don't like to do. That stuff tends to get pushed aside a lot.
You really have to sort your priorities.
The kid obviously like trumps everything, of course. But it's also, I think it's important for your child to know that that their parents are people too, and that their parents don't exist for something other than just parenting. I want my son to see that I'm a person with hopes and dreams and with aspirations and things that I like to do and all that, and I hope that inspires him to do the same. And it's also, I think it's good for kids to learn boundaries in that, like I was an only child, so I kind of grew up thinking the world revolves around me, and I don't want my son to be the same way. Like I want him to know that he's important and the most important thing to me, but I also want him to know that I don't exist only to serve him. Now, granted, he's only 15 months old, so there's not literally like a lot of back and forth with him yet. He's still like learning how to communicate and all that. So like parenting, I think parents' relationship with their child is constantly morphing, and what they need from you is also constantly morphing. So it's always like a new thing for me to navigate every time he like enters a new phase, or learns a new skill. And I'm sure that'll continue to change, over the course of our lives.
Nice. That's really fantastic to hear. All right, so the last 2 questions I have. So the penultimate question: do you have any advice for bands and artists, whether they're punk or metal or any other genre? Do you have any advice for bands trying to just make it from the ground up nowadays?
I guess it would be make your own luck. Be part of a community. Be present. Don't look at what you do as a competition. Look at it as cooperation. I know it's natural to feel competitive with your peers, but I think that taking part in a community and helping to boost up the other people around you, support them. I believe that breeds a lot of equity in the goodwill that you bring to the table by being kind and present and helpful to your friends, your peers, your community. So that's number one, and to just so So that might mean supporting your local recording engineer, your local venue, your local promoter, whatever. Just remember remember the people who are helping you, and and help them in return, and that will help set the tone for your future endeavors as you need things.
All right, that is fantastic advice. And so, the last question, just an off the cuff thing. Favorite movie of all time?
Let's see. I'll say Brazil.
Oh, that's a good pick. That's a fantastic pick.
Yeah, I like all Terry Gilliam stuff.
All right, so I think that will be the end of the interview. All right, again.
Okay.
All right, so this will be the interview. Again, Kurt, thanks so much for doing this interview. I sincerely appreciate it.
No problem. Thank you for having me.
All right.